I'm standing here today on the place that was called the UMSCHLAGPLATZ. As you see behind me, there's a wall which kept the people that were gathered by the Germans and taken out, possibly alive, from the basements that we were hiding, and that was during and after the burning of the ghetto. The walls were to keep the people together without being dispersed while they were being loaded on boxcars that waited for them there for loading, without a platform, but there were 4x8 plywood sheets that had wood trimming nailed onto them and 3 spots, because the plywood sheets were at a 45-degree angle. If people tried to be pushed into the car, they would slide back, thus the trim would hold them back from being loaded. I'll stop for a minute because I told you that I was in front of a wall that was one of the first walls built in the Warsaw Ghetto. Number one, it didn't have, or it doesn't have, enough white bricks to have concrete and glass embedded with barbed wire, because it was for holding in the people in, and some of these were built to keep people in the ghetto. And they were built like you see this one, like you would crossing the street. Well, after some of them were built, the youngsters that were smuggling, since the buildings were joined, we could get up to the highest floor, or possibly the ceiling, or the roof, and jump from one building to another. So the wall didn't mean anything. So some of the first walls were destroyed, and then a wall put right in the middle of the street, as you see a stripe in today's day, to make 2 lanes of traffic. I hope this is understood. When we were brought to this place, we were lucky to have a part of our family together, but the close family, like my father, mom, little brother, some of the close aunts that finally lived with us on Muranowska Street after we were moved 3 times, but they lived originally in a different apartment, but came to live with us because it was much easier to survive living with a family than it was with strangers, because there was a shortage of utilities, food, anything that's necessary to sustain normal life. And at situations like that, we become very egoistic, and everything is done secretly so somebody would not use the same method as you use for survival. So when we got here, we tried to keep our family, close family, together, and were able to succeed to a certain degree. Because when the people were loaded, we all marched in like the military, 5 abreast. And it took a little bit of time to get settled while we were waiting in this confined area to be placed on the cars. So then there were groups chosen and shoved into the cars. And most of the time, and these are statistics that people say afterwards, because we were not able to count, that at least 100 people were shoved in to one of the small, and some of these were World War I boxcars. Sometimes the roof had tar paper on the inside and the outside in order to keep from the merchandise that would be handling under normal circumstances wouldn't be wet. So consider this, our turn comes when a group of 5 abreast people is moved into the boxcar, and I'm making it a little bit easier because sometimes all the groups that were being loaded were more like one jam, but I'm just isolating the 100 people that are placed on the boxcar. The boxcar is closed. There are no facilities on that boxcar. You might have heard from others that there were none on this boxcar. You get on there and you don't know where you're going. All you know that you didn't commit any crime, you weren't a bad person, but you are Jewish, and that's why people are shoving you into something where anything that's going to happen in the future is unknown. The boxcar is closed. It has 2 small openings on either side, windows. One has steel bars in it, like in a jail, and the other one, a couple were ripped, or maybe 1 or 2 were ripped. So there's barbed wire that was wrapped around the 2 so nobody could slip out in between. And you are 14 years old, you're not as tall as a person, and the person next to you is much taller, and you don't know whether it's a male or a female because they're shivering from cold, and they are skinny from not being able to eat, and the eyes are closed, so you don't know if they're sleeping, dreaming, or they are deceased. But sometimes, now this is no, as we are being loaded, but this happens after a period of time that we judged as being 5 days on the road in the same car without the utilities and standing like that. Maybe by the second or third day, you see people slipping down into the bottom, and the ground the floor that you stood at may be blocked if you want to move a little for movement that your body requires. And also, you don't eat for 5 days, and that's how long, in my opinion, as a 14-year-old being on that car, if you don't eat or drink, you still have human waste, and the cars that we were loaded on made previous tripped and were unwashed or disinfected, so the smell was impregnated into the wood before we got on there. Why 5 days? The Jewish trains were placed on spurs or siding or rail sidings certain times on the trip to allow regular trains run the regular routes, and in some cases just left there for the people that are on the train to die, so all they'll have to do is bring the cars to the crematorium and burn their bodies. Then the ashes taken out, which take out much less space than burial. This went on for the period of time until we reached Lublin. I also want to describe one incident that happened when you are confined in a little square with a low ceiling and there was tar paper. The humidity that was created by the breathing of the 100 or so victims created a situation like you might see on a lid of a pile of a boiling pot of water. So you see a little bit of bubbles of the humidity hanging on the ceiling, and you see some people maybe able to be tall enough and touch the tar paper and get a drop of that water and wet their lips while screaming in a very berserk way and trying to wet their lips, because it's much harder to die from dehydration than it is from starvation. The train stopped, and the next thing that I remember is looking through the window, and it says Majdanek, and that's where I thought I was when it said, when I looked, it said Lublin. So I thought that I was in Lublin when I was placed in Majdanek. And after I saw that, the train was jilted with a switch engine that switched us closer to the gate of the Majdanek concentration camp. But there were no signs there, so I didn't know where I was for the duration of stay in Majdanek. I thought it was in Lublin.